So my own conversion, in fact, large part of my own vocation as a writer is to share the beauty and goodness and truth of these great writers, because I know the power they have, because I've experienced it and it's changed my life. So if it can change my life, it can change the lives of many others. And of course, the number of people who have been converted, at least in part, through the reading of Chesterton or C.S. Lewis or Tolkien, it's countless. We have no idea how many.
In a nutshell, about literature with Joseph Pearcem.
Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I am Franczak and this is part 43 of In a Nutshell about Literature with Joseph Pearcem. In the previous episode we discussed whether a work of literature can possibly be wiser than its creator, and if so, how that could happen. Now we are turning to the topic of literature and conversion. Can literature lead us to conversion and ultimately to salvation? So how actually does good literature lead us to goodness, truth and beauty?
Well, I think there are three distinct ways that would be the case. First of all, that there are two types of literature in the broader sense of the word here. There's the lyrical and the narrative. In terms of poetry, a lyrical poem is a song, right? It's not necessarily telling a story. It might be responding to something which is beautiful in front of us, a sunset, a sunrise, and lifting up the mind and the heart in praise for the beauty the beauty of the experience. Right? This is anthropos. Right? This is man who turns up in wonder, who gazes. This is lyrical poetry. So we can be brought to God just through praising the beauty of the cosmos, or we can also be brought to God by the experience of a great poem doing that, right? So subcreation or creation can lead us in the gazing upwards towards the divine, anthropos, edification. But the narrative is that we are living in a story. Our own life is a story. Our own life is both a story and a journey. Every other person's life is both a story and a journey. So we are, if you like, are individual characters with our own stories within a bigger story, which is history, right? So if that's the case, then we will understand who we are, where we are, why we are, and where we're going through seeing stories presented to us. Which is why, that's why Jesus Christ sanctifies stories with his parables, right? He sanctifies stories with the story of his own life, first of all, but within that story of his own life, which is the most powerful story for us to understand our lives, we're meant to take up our cross and follow in the footsteps of Jesus, right? Well, he shows us how we do that by what he did. But then within that story, stories like the prodigal son, right, show us aspects of who we are and who we need to be and who we shouldn't be through the story, but through the telling of narrative. So the great literature either edifies by leading us up, or it shows us the journey that we're on. And again, within that journey, the battle between good and evil, the journey is a quest, ultimately the quest for heaven, or the journey as doing what we want, going where we want, or not going anywhere in particular. So in other words, the struggle between homo viator, traveling man, wayfaring man or pilgrim man, and homo superbus, proud man who just wants to be left alone to do his own thing.
I think that this Dante's concept of literature leading the reader to salvation means that it puts a lot of responsibility actually on the writer himself, because he might lead the reader astray, right?
Yes, those to whom much is given, much is expected. So if you've been given 5 talents as a storyteller, and then you use those 5 talents to lead people astray, then you're going to have to answer for the fact that God gave you those 5 talents to bring people to Him, and instead of doing that, you have basically cast the priceless pearls that He gave you before swine.
And can actually literature lead to conversion? Because if we think about salvation, so it means also that you need to convert very often. Yes, because I think you have, if I'm not mistaken, your own personal experience in that.
Yes, indeed. I mean, I could name several works of literature that were crucial upon my own conversion. Just about anything that Chesterton wrote that I read led me towards the church. Hilaire Belloc, John Henry Newman, Thomas Aquinas, J.R.R. Tolkien, C.S. Lewis. So my own conversion, in fact, large part of my own vocation as a writer is to share the beauty and goodness and truth of these great writers, because I know the power they have, because I've experienced it and it's changed my life. So if it can change my life, it can change the lives of many others. And of course, the number of people who have been converted, at least in part, through the reading of Chesterton or C.S. Lewis or Tolkien, it's countless. We have no idea how many. But yes, absolutely, the great literature leads us to Christ, and the conversion is just turning towards, and you can have lots of mini conversions, right? That you can be, if you're a long way from Christ, you're probably not going to have this eureka moment, I found it moment where you're an atheist and then all of a sudden you're a Catholic. It does happen, I'm sure, but normally what's happening is that you're reading stuff that's turning you away bit by bit from the atheism, and then from these new positions you're more open to the divine, and you would have been over there. So there's a series of mini conversions that lead you on the journey towards Christ, and at some point then you get to the threshold and you've been prepared to get this far, and then it requires that leap of faith to actually enter the church.
As I remember from your autobiography, it was, in your case, this process, yes, to convert to Catholicism. But then another question that might be important also for our viewers, does it necessarily mean that such books should be Catholic? Because Chesterton, Tolkien, these are Catholic writers.
Yes, it gets complicated because probably over half of Chesterton's books were written before technically he was a Catholic.
Ah, yes. Okay.
So, well, the point is that anything that's pointing towards the truth is pointing towards Christ. So someone who's not a Catholic, that nonetheless is moving and pointing in the right direction, will move us and point us in the right direction. C.S. Lewis never became a Catholic, and yet he moves people away from atheism and agnosticism and relativism towards an understanding of the divine, which is essentially orthodox, and takes people to the very gates of the church. He didn't cross the threshold himself, but many other people that have been led to the threshold by him have crossed the threshold.
Mm-hmm. Yes, even some people who don't know C.S. Lewis's biography think that he was a Catholic. I even remember one Polish translation a long time ago where on the back cover it was written that he was a Catholic writer. I don't know why they made this mistake, but the publisher apparently didn't check.
Well, what was very amusing, one of Lewis's earliest works was a book with the Pilgrim's Regress. I don't know if you've read that, Jan, but it's basically a formal allegory which tells of Lewis's own intellectual journey to Christianity. And it's sort of it's a form of allegory. In other words, he meets people like the Spirit of the Age and a beautiful woman called Reason and Mr. Enlightenment and what have you, and these various ideas and how this journey is Mr. Virtue and how this journey leads him ultimately to Mother Kirk, Mother Church, right? And after it was published, because this is early, most people didn't know who C.S. Lewis was, 1933, I think. That nearly all the reviewers assumed he was Catholic, and he was puzzled and irritated. But if you actually read that book, not knowing it's by C.S. Lewis, and just read it by an anonymous author, you are going to this person's clearly become a Catholic.
And by the way, this book refers to another Christian or Protestant classic book, Pilgrim's Progress. Yes.
Yes. Well, that's the idea that he took John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, and
yes,
then
John Bunyan's.
every man figure is called Christian. In C.S. Lewis, it's John. I'd say John's the most common name, but John is both an everyman figure, but specifically it's a C.S. Lewis figure. This is an autobiographical work in the guise of fictional allegory.
Mm-hmm. And by the way, when I think about Chesterton, for me it is a little bit funny because Hilaire Belloc was Catholic, cradle Catholic, as we say in English, yes? But they friend, I mean Chesterton and Belloc's Maurice Baring, he converted before Chesterton, and if I remember correctly, you suggested that probably influenced by Chesterton. Yes.
It was certainly influenced by Chesterton. Monsignor Ronald Knox obviously became a great writer, a Catholic priest, and he translated the Bible. He said long before Chesterton became a Catholic, he made a Catholic of me. So yes, there were many people that were led to the church by Chesterton and got there before he did, which is ironic and funny.
Yes, it is fun, especially that Chesterton's wife, if I remember correctly, was not very happy that he finally converted to Catholicism.
Well, that was the main reason he took so long, actually. He didn't want to take this step without her. They had a very good marriage, and he had a very good Christian understanding of marriage, of being one flesh. Well, obviously becoming a Catholic is if by himself, there's going to be this rupture between husband and wife. So he didn't want that. But in the end, his conscience he could not delay any longer. He was realizing that this was now sinful because he knew he had to become a Catholic and he was just not doing it. And so he took the step by himself. And Francis was weeping at the reception church. We hope tears of joy as well as tears of sorrow. But a couple of years later, she comes into the church as well, and then they happily go to church together as Catholics thereafter.
Which reminds me of another conversion story, an important American contemporary writer, Scott Hahn. Because his story was a little bit similar. He, after digging deeper and deeper, he finally decided that he needed to convert to Catholicism, but his wife was not happy about it, and they agreed. I don't remember right now how long he should wait. I don't know, let's say 5 years or something. But at a certain moment, he said that no, he couldn't wait longer. Yes, and his wife was, I suppose, devastated. But finally, she converted to Catholicism too. And which means, by the way, that you also need some courage, I think, in this case, yes, to do it.
Yes, and you also need, possibly in the situation here, a truly loving spouse, right? That doesn't understand why you're doing this. It's putting a barrier between the two of you, but nonetheless is not going to allow that to destroy the marriage. And somehow it's going to be prayerfully hope that everything's being done according to God's will. And then those sorts of prayers are answered in the best way possible, with the spouse also taking the same step, albeit perhaps somewhat later.
Yes, and in case of Scott Hahn's wife, some of her friends told her that in this case she could actually consider divorce, right? And she couldn't approve that. Fortunately, everything ended well.
Thank you for watching. If you haven't seen the previous episodes yet, please check the In a Nutshell About Literature playlist. You can watch them individually or as 5 longer compilation videos. And please remember, you can support the development of this channel in several ways. Subscribe to the channel, like this video and leave a comment. Share the video by copying the link and posting it on other social media. And support us financially by buying me a virtual cup of coffee or making a donation. You can also support the development of this channel by doing the shopping in my online store. Please check out what you can get there. And you can check the options below the video, where you'll find links to these services, including Buy Coffee Too and Zrzutka. Thank you once again, and see you in the next episodes of In a Nutshell About Literature with Joseph Pearce. God bless you.